Guys, it's Godbars here, the self-proclaimed hip-hop historian, and this is the 116th episode of my series where I grab a vinyl from my collection, talk about why I love it, what influence it had, and what its place is in the grand scheme of hip-hop. I've talked at length about how Billy Woods has been my favorite MC for about a decade now, even though he technically debuted in the early 2000s. However, him taking that top spot for me didn't really transpire until 2015, when he released what I still view as his magnum opus to this day, Today I Wrote Nothing. Prior to that, I was just coming out of the phase that me, my friends, and a lot of teens our age had been in, which for us consisted of acts like Flatbush Zombies and the rest of Beast Coast, TDE, more specifically the Black Hippie era, ASAP Mob, Mick Jenkins, and arguably most of all, Odd Future. Of course, the driving force and founder behind the collective was Tyler the Creator, and it was his early music that first made me aware of the crew and was on constant rotation for me. Earl Sweatshirt quickly became my favorite member upon getting introduced to him on the group track Oldie. I still remember being in 8th or ninth grade, sitting on my couch and watching that video, which my friends were showing me for the first time as it had just come out. My eye was already drawn to Earl from the start because there was something so infectious about his smile and screen presence that made him stand out amongst a room full of characters. I didn't even know if he was going to rap at first, but when he did, I was absolutely blown away by how dense and heady his bars were. He seemed like the youngest in the bunch, yet despite a number of killer verses before his, he came across like Shakespeare not just next to the other members, but next to the average MC of any age in general. Ironically, while Earl was my favorite until I discovered Billy, at the time nobody was really expecting them to collaborate, at least I wasn't. So when Earl finally did collaborate with Billy for the stellar 2021 Arm & Hammer LP Haram, it was such a dope and rewarding surprise to longtime fans of both parties. Of course, if you kept up with either legend in recent years, you'll know Earl, Billy, and Uncle Al have all become somewhat frequent collaborators, and I actually saw a show with all three here in LA about a year or so ago. I had initially just gone for Billy and Navy Blue, and there was no mention of Earl or Alchemist, so when I was waiting with my friends outside the venue beforehand, I was pretty starstruck to hear my friends say, "Look, there's Earl," and then I looked up and Earl was like 10 feet away from me, making direct eye contact with me. Even though that was just a moment, I totally panicked and needless to say did not talk to any of my heroes that night, but it was still a great show regardless. And I also got an insanely dope privilege I may never get again, which was to see one of my favorite poets and lyricists in the genre, word for word reciting the bars from another personal goat of mine. However, while this experimental leg in Earl's career arguably really got started with 2018's Some Rap Songs, today we're winding back the clock to discuss Earl's first real project, unless you're counting those kind of early MySpace mixtapes. While I definitely can acknowledge the growth and maturity Earl continues to show the older he gets, it's hard not to be nostalgic for 2013's Doris, as this was probably my favorite album for at least a third of my high school experience. I'm guilty of this with a number of my favorite MCs, but in my old SoundCloud music from back in the day, much of the time it's painfully obvious how inspired I was by not just Earl, but direct flows that he'll use on here. I can't say how much of it was subconscious, but I look back now and catch schemes and flow patterns that sound suspiciously like certain tracks on Doris, and I think that's really just because I was so obsessed with this thing. I was completely entertained front to back when I was 14 and honestly still am to this day, as he made this thing at a time where he was at a pretty interesting crossroads in his music. He was still part of Odd Future, but similar to other artists in the collective, he was starting to grow up and move away from the more edgy and vulgar shock value material they'd kind of built their brand on. He was also starting to manifest these darker feelings into his own unique production style, which was downtrodden, grimy, and at times even a little bit creepy. This would become a reoccurring staple of his music down the line, and while the overall vibe here isn't nearly as bleak as what we hear later on, his personal verses about his father leaving when Earl was still at a pretty young age is sinister in a different kind of way. To be fair, he was practically still a teen here. It's just easy to forget because of how poetic his imagery can be. Like when he describes the conflicting feelings of wishing he had said he loved his father when he was around, but every chance he got to do so, he quote unquote swallowed it. Earl's back and forths are another one of my favorite aspects to this project because no matter what vocal tone or general style he's being accompanied by, he always manages to make it work and complement it well. The way he weaves a story on a track like Sasquatch shows how vivid his pen can be, coming in with Squadron full of some lost souls, Sergeant of all, it's autumn, and not just nollied a pothole, non-cooperative with his mama's wishes for college, and coppers labeled a problem since paying for Damiano's, so shimmy through the swamp, follow me through the foxholes, moral Orenthal, with a pretty bitch in a Bronco, hopped right out the seven and stumbled into some vatos, threw a punch, got jumped, dusted off, and then walked home. Shit, it's like 6 p.m. and his temple throbbing, hand in the cabinet, by 7 snip the prescription oxys. You can also tell there's a clear MF Doom influence in how he structures his lines, but just like Rock Marciano or Open Mike Eagle, he pulls inspiration from the villain's idiosyncratic style but still puts it in its own context. While Earl is a pretty undermentioned producer who had a hand in the beats here, he also had assistance from the likes of Bad Bad Not Good, Christian Rich, Frank Ocean, Matt Martians, Michael Uzi Uzaruru, The Neptunes, Sam I Am, RZA, and of course Tyler the Creator. A few of these guys double as featured artists like Tyler, Frank, and RZA, but the rest of the guest appearances are delegated to S.K. LaFleur, Vince Staples, Damo Genesis, Casey Veggies, and late Mac Miller. For honorable mentions on this one, I'd probably go with Pre, 20 Wave Caps, Sunday, Sasquatch, Molasses, Sancterion, and Night. When it comes to my three favorite tracks overall on Doris, they'd probably have to be Hive, Chum, and Burgundy. Thank you for watching my 116th video. Next time we're going from the west to the east to discuss another personal favorite that came out in the last decade. And I'd hazard a guess most of you probably haven't heard this one. So tune in for that, and if you enjoyed, be sure to like, subscribe, and let me know what your favorite songs off Earl's insanely impressive debut LP are. Don't forget to have a great day, and I'll see you next time, okay? Alright.